Welcome, everyone, to How to Thrive in IT. My name is DJ Eshelman, but more on that later. Today, we're going to be talking through a few topics that may be a little bit different. We're going to be talking through more of the life in information technology, less about the technology. And so, just to forewarn you, that is our general theme for this. And so, I'm glad you're here with me today. Also, glad for those that are tuning into the live recording of this as well, which is very fun. So, let's dive into this, shall we? Today, we're going to be talking about traumas in information technology services. It's not something we talk about very often, but is something that I think needs to be talked about more. And so we'll have a few different perspectives to get into here. And the cool thing about this is a presentation that I gave for Login VSI in 2022 with a couple updates for our podcast here. But if you have any questions, there'll be a link in the comments where you can reach out to me and certainly engage with me on that. So let's dive into this. First of all, we're going through about five different things here today. So one is I'll do a little bit more of an introduction of myself. I know this is an early on episode of the podcast, and so there's a lot of things that you may not know about me yet, and so I'll make sure we cover that. Number two, we'll be talking about our traumas and kind of recognizing that and the fact that we do have traumas that we often don't realize we have in information technology services. We're going to talk, number three, about kind of why DevOps and Agile kind of suck in IT services. They may work in other things, but kind of suck in IT services. I'm sure I'll get some hate on this, but I don't care. Number four, we're going to talk about my tips for preventing IT trauma and looking at a way forward in number five. So let's dive right into this. And first of all, who is this DJ guy that's talking to you? Who is this sultry voice that I love to hear? I'm kidding. My name is DJ Eshelman. I have an interesting background, but basically, I'll leave that for another episode. And I will say today that I started working in IT services sometime around 1997 when I started working for an internet service provider. Back in the day, that was a dial-up kind of a thing, and it was a very interactive process as far as getting it all set up and things like that. So I was part of the team that helped people set up their dial-up internet and supported them, and also taught classes on how to use computers and that sort of thing. And then right around 2001, I decided to abandon my psychology degree completely and go into information technology full time. And so I started traveling all over the place in 2001 as a engineer and a consultant. Most known for there's a chain of copier places called Kinko's, which is now FedEx Office here in the States. But that was a big project of mine. I went around all, oh gosh, I don't even know how many of those there actually were, but I was there to install their credit card systems and update their servers. And so a different place every single night, every single day that I was in that project. So that was about 3 years of doing that. And so that was, I began with travel as far as the experience goes there. But then in 2004, I was voluntold, I guess I would say. I didn't know about this technology at the time, but I was voluntold to learn this thing called Citrix for a legal office that I was helping to serve at the time. And so I became the Citrix guy in 2004 after that job. I think technically it might have been 2003 that I started learning it, but 2004 is when I really kind of knew the thing and understood it and well enough to put it on my resume, which is kind of silly when I think about it now. I really didn't know it that well, but I did it anyway. I put it right on the resume there. And so out of that came me doing a job that I was hired specifically to do Citrix all the time. And so that became that guy in 2004. And then in 2011, fast forward a bit, I started doing Citrix consulting work. And so I actually worked with Citrix Consulting as a contract employee, kind of arrangement. So I started going on the road again all the time in 2011. And so I had a couple of years of break of not being on the road, and then all of a sudden I was back on the road. So fun times. There's some other things that happened with the Citrix world that kind of got me more of where I am today is in terms of talking more to people and helping them out instead of just being the guy that was just behind the scenes. And so that kind of started in 2000, started in 2015, but really around 2017 is when I started to become much more visible out there. Started with being a Citrix technology advocate or CTA back in 2017 and kind of being involved with that sort of thing. And then out of a lot of conversations that I started to do coaching work in 2019. So that was kind of where I'm at today is much more of a focus on coaching than anything else. But that's yeah, neither here nor there, I guess, at this moment. But we'll get into that later on. I did go ahead and publish two books in 2020, and writing on the coattails of that ever since. I'm kidding. The two books were called "Be a Citrix Hero" and "Just Do This: A Simpler Way to Succeed in IT." And just do this. We'll talk a little bit more about here soon. But right about that same time in 2020, I founded the thriveit.com and the YouTube channel that some of you are viewing on right now. That is the present there. So that is something that is been a fun part of this. But I'll tell you what, why don't we do this before we get much more into this? What I want you to do is do something kind of weird. Now, if you're driving right now or out and about, you may not be able to do this, but just mentally kind of do this. What I do when I do this from the stage, I have people close their eyes. So feel free to do that. But the picture is that you are sleeping. It's very late at night. It's a cold night outside. So you're bundled up. You're next to your new bride, as it turns out. And then around 3 in the morning, you hear an alarm going off. You startle awake and find yourself wondering what the noise possibly could be. And you realize it's your phone. You've, of course, startled your new bride as well. And she is very confused. Why is this person having a phone going off at 3 in the morning? And you find out that it's an alarm from the temperature monitoring system from one of your clients. One of their server rooms is overheating. Now, it just so happens that you're the only person that knows how to deal with any of this. You're the only person that is able to be called on this. So even though it is about negative 20 degrees outside in the Colorado cold, you have to go drive to a location to find out why their server room is overheating when it's negative 20 degrees outside. Now, to finish that part of the story, it actually was a legitimate concern. The airflow in the room was not, it was a closed loop system. And so there was no air able to get in. It was only circulated from the air conditioning, which had stopped working because air conditioning systems don't work past about freezing. And so it was a legit concern, but the difference here is that this is not uncommon for a lot of people in IT services. This is not an uncommon experience where they're getting calls. I even got called on my honeymoon. You know, this is not an uncommon thing to have to deal with things when others don't. And really, I think what we have to realize here is that this is part of our trauma. We don't think of it this way sometimes. We think of it in terms of it is just the experience of working in IT. But what we have to recognize here is that it causes traumas along the way. It doesn't just go away, it builds. And there's a lot of things that we need to recognize here. And some of these are just fine and we can get over. And some of these, they're a little bit unusual and we have to treat them differently. So we tend to be working when others in the company aren't. just as a normal part of what we often do. We often have to be making changes to production systems when others are not working. And it's just a natural part of our having to do that as far as working in IT services and deployments, administration, all these kind of roles that require these things to be true. The reality is that that's a trauma that builds up over time. When you realize that you are not spending time with your family when others are, it can start to grate at you. You can be on call when others aren't. You can have experiences of, well, let's just say it this way: nobody's calling Jim in accounting at 3 a.m., but you might get a call. Nobody's asking, you know, Sally from HR to work over the weekend, but you might have to. In fact, in IT services, oftentimes in engineering, administration, those kind of roles, you might be required to be on call for an entire weekend. In other words, you have to not have plans in order to be responding to trouble tickets and trouble problems that other people have. Yeah. And this is especially true in things like healthcare, where it's a 24/7 operation. Some manufacturing and things like that too. But there's a lot of sectors that are actually kind of worse at this. But it's very true. Believe it or not, there's another kind of trauma that I call the brass handcuffs. This one's very interesting because you might have heard the term golden handcuffs, where you're making so much money that you can't picture quitting. The brass handcuffs are very similar. You might have some money that's being made, but there is a underlying fear that many people in IT services have, that they won't be able to find another job if they're fired or quit. And so they hold on to their job, even though it's not really gold. It's more like brass. Hope that resonates with people. That's really a tough one, but it is true. The other thing that I will say in our industry, and this isn't necessarily a management thing, this isn't a being done by companies on purpose or anything like that. This is more of just our communities in general, where we actually encourage imposter syndrome. We don't realize we're doing it, but there is a notion of always trying to find who has the most experience or who has the most traumas or who has the most whatever it looks like. And so what it becomes is that a bunch of other people are now left with feeling like they are less. And so that can add up on traumas over time. And honestly, things that I've talked about before is that may not go away just because you get more experience. The thing that happens is that leadership will change their priorities on us in a moment's notice. We're just getting into a groove with something, and they'll go to golf with someone. You know, I'm laughing because, and I'm sure that many people will say this to me as well, or leave comments on posts and that sort of thing, of saying, "Yep, that's happened to me." Where all of a sudden there's a new toy, or there's a new thing, or whatever. It might just be just a quarterly meeting didn't go well, and all of a sudden everything changes priority wise, and IT has to change the most rapidly to deal with it. And so you never really know what's coming. You always feel like there's an under the gun kind of a thing, to use that colloquialism, that you're always wondering what's going to happen next because you don't really have an insight into that. It's a very, very common thing. Another thing that happens a lot in IT, and this might be one of the most common things actually, is that we are often blamed for issues that are typically not our fault. In recent years, actually, since this presentation was kind of put together, I have added the issue with CrowdStrike into here. I mean, I've talked to some people that have been were seriously impacted by that, like that had 3 days straight of no sleep, of being on all that time, and it wasn't just that they were on and responsive. What was happening was people were getting mad at them because of the issues that were occurring, even though they didn't do anything wrong at all. They woke up to it and were shocked just as much as you were, but they take the blame and they take the drama for that. And what this leads to is what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, we don't like to talk about this. This is usually something that's we think of with people that have gone through combat or traumatic situations like that, or sexual abuse and extremes is what we think of PTSD. But PTSD is often caused by repeated traumas that happen over and over again, or that have impacts in the way we live our lives. But most importantly, with PTSD, it's a notion of perceiving stress when that does not exist. And I'll give you an example of this. And when I realized this was a big issue, was I was actually working with a consulting client not too long ago. Actually, it was like 2023, 2023. Um, and what happened was that they couldn't meet with me that morning. It was a remote kind of a thing, and so it was easy enough to pivot from. But it was one of those things where they couldn't meet with me because they had an outage, and for whatever reason, I felt stressed immediately on that. My heart started racing. I started to feel kind of like clammy, and I was aware that my face was flush, and I was thinking about things like, "Oh my gosh, what did we do? What happened?" You know, I'm not telling them to do anything in production. Why would they? Did they not listen to me? Am I going to be blamed? Am I going to lose this contract? Am I not going to have enough food to feed my family? Is this going to be a scar on my life forever? Is this going to be something where I'm never going to be able to recover from? And I just have to learn to go work at McDonald's or something at this point? Or what am I going to have to do? What am I going to do? These thoughts start racing through my head, and I suddenly stopped and said, "Wait a minute, what's the outage?" And it turned out to be, I believe it was like a file server in some other unconnected system. It had nothing to do with Citrix or what I was there to deal with. That's what PTSD is like, is when you have a response to a stimuli that is not appropriate for that situation. That response is not appropriate for the stimuli. It's you responding as you normally would to a stressful situation when that doesn't actually exist, and that can get really ugly, really ugly. That can actually cause family issues and things like that. We'll maybe get into either today or another day. We're talking about this, but in terms of that goes, I mean, that's really kind of what ends up happening with that is that you can't like switch off. You always feel like you're on. You know, vacations aren't really vacations. They're times you go along with people to do things, but you're checking your email all the time. You're checking in on Slack. You're still connected because you feel like if you switch off, if you truly go away, then everything's going to blow up and you're not going to have a job when you get back. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what trauma is. Right. And honestly, that's a lot to take in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a just a quick little break here, and we're going to. I'm actually going to tell you about today's episode sponsor. It's not actually a sponsor, just to be honest with you, but the way this works is we'll have these little resources and these sponsors every now and then. So I'm reserving this spot. And so what I want to tell you about today is a um, actually just as much a resource as anything else. But it is a since it isn't a product, and I'm actually an affiliate on Amazon, and I'm actually compensated when people buy this on with this link. Then yeah, we'll just call it a sponsor for now, even though they don't know I'm doing this. For almost gosh, going on almost 20 years now, I have had this device called an AeroPress. And what it does is it allows you to have a single serving, or maybe a little bit more than a single serving in my case, of coffee that you can make easily at your desk or at your cubicle. I like this because what you can do is just have the ground coffee into the end of the device here, and heat up some water, bring the water over, place the AeroPress on your cup, and then you can um, put the water in, and then mix up the grinds in there, and then when it's ready, you press it down, and the coffee goes through the filter and into the cup. And now you have a cup of coffee, and you can just go over to the trash can and pop out the grinds and the filter. It's very, very easy to use. And so something that I have been using for a long time, like I said, I use it almost daily and has been great. And so I highly recommend that for a resource for you. So that's today's sponsor, I guess you could say, or affiliate is AeroPress. And so link will be in the description, and you can get that at your leisure from Amazon or wherever you like. I just want you to have the resource. It doesn't matter. So let's move on to kind of the next part about this, and that is the notion of things like DevOps and Agile. They were supposed to be these great things. They're supposed to be awesome revolutions, and I will say that the DevOps specifically is something that does still work well enough for IT services, but there are some very specific problems that I've noticed over the years that are getting worse and worse. And just to put this out there, in terms of that feeling out of control, that is one of the biggest problems about this. And so let's dive into this a little bit about what was supposed to happen when it came to all these kind of things. You were supposed to have a controlled methodology. You're supposed to have a that controlled methodology where you know what's coming. You're following a process. There's no getting away from the process. The process covers every bit of drama and everything that comes up. And so you're supposed to be there. And you're supposed to have a sensible workflow that's, well, hopefully based on time tested things like the theory of constraints from Elijah Goldratt. All these kind of things that actually do work in terms of making work happen, making profit happen, making money. But what has happened is that sometimes that's not being followed. And so, and then there's a lot of things in terms of collaboration that are set up in a lot of these quality methodologies. There's some others that don't do collaboration the same kind of way, like ITIL, for example, will have collaboration, but it won't be done prior to the development. It'll be done at the point of deployment. So that's what collaborating on, like when to deploy it and how, that sort of thing is true. But ahead of any of those kind of other processes, it's not really done, and so it's not as collaborative as it should be. The other thing is change control. Like I mentioned, ITIL, you're supposed to have some methodology of changing or controlling when changes are occurring to reduce the outages. Supposed to have defined success criteria. So I'm supposed to have things that make sense to everybody. And you're supposed to have development handing off to operations, for example, in DevOps, where you have a team that is developing a solution and they hand that off to another team to continue to operate. You're supposed to have a notion of, yeah, it's fine to take time off because someone else is going to be able to cover for you. You can just you have staff. We have processes in place to do that. So that's what it's supposed to be like. Now, what has actually happened is what I call do what I tell you ops or do what I want ops in some cases. But the worst case I've heard, literally, I've heard these words. Picture me doing air fingers quotes because I've actually heard this. Just do it anyway. We're agile. Just do it anyway. We're agile. In other words, just go ahead and deploy. It doesn't matter. We're agile. I've literally heard these words from a customer before. I was like, you don't know how this works, do you? That's just do what I tell you, ops. Um, the other thing that's happened a lot is just testing in production. Um, cough, CrowdStrike, cough. There's a lot of that that's going on these days of just yeah, just put it out there and we'll see what happens. And a lot of times, just to back up on that second, there's sometimes people just don't know any better. Unfortunately, it's been happening. The Some of the methodologies will have what's called a scrum or a meeting of the minds kind of thing in the mornings or sometimes whatever it works for that team. But what I've seen this devolve into is basically just bitch sessions where you're more of a meeting than that's getting work done. And so you just have that added drama in there that comes with that. And so now on top of the work having stress, now you have the stress of dealing with interpersonal issues that come up when we're supposed to be talking about at work. It is a thing that I've seen a lot of. The other thing that really is really nasty is unscheduled changes. Um, and this happens in security a lot. Just FYI, this is nothing new. It always seems to be the thing. This is like that panic response of, oh, we have to get this deployed right now, and or a lot of times it's in my experiences too. You can have certain people that just perceive an emergency where none exists and make it your problem. So they're off getting dinner and they're expecting you to be updating all the software. So those, tax scales are all done in the accounting software because it has to be done right now. And it was not never, you weren't told it was coming. They just say, oh, yeah, by the way, I need this by the end of the day. That sort of thing. It's unscheduled and can cause a lot of trauma. The other thing that's happened in a lot of agile, especially, is and this doesn't always apply to IT operations or like IT services, but there is a notion of the minimum viable product or MVP, and what that becomes is the thing everybody hates. It's in other words, you're not making anybody happy. You're just going with the basic minimum to keep everybody afloat. And so it's minimum viable, which is great in some regards, but I'm finding that notion of especially software development is not resonating like it's supposed to. It's not doing what it was supposed to do, and it's just causing more issues. Then you have things in um, certain organizations where sales and leadership promise impossible things without consulting IT first. This happens a lot, where you have a promise that's made without any consideration of how much it would take work wise. You have a lot of missed targets on that. You have a lot of timelines that get screwed up there because there's not a process in place to make sure everybody's on the same page. Doesn't happen in a lot of organizations that's not a factor where IT is just basically an internal thing. But this has happened a lot in my life when I've done a lot of consulting work, but other types of work where we're serving other customers, that sort of thing. It's a thing. It is a thing. Then they have things like blame culture. You have literal threats. You have people. I've been screamed at. I've been yelled at. I've been quietly threatened with my job. I've had some interesting experiences that are shared with a lot of people. I've heard stories of people literally being fearful of their family's well-being because of things not going well and things like that. It's amazing that this is even possibly a thing, but it's there. And then of course you have the burnout, the quiet quitting, all these kind of things that happen out of this. So, let's shift on a little bit into more of like how to prevent this. How do we how do we get to the point of being able to prevent these traumas from occurring? And the first thing I'll say is that your methodology does matter, and it matters more. Sorry, it matters more in regards to preventing miscommunications and things like that. But it gives a agreement versus an expectation. We'll get into that later, I think. But yeah, so the first thing is you're not doing any harm. It's that whole physician's creed, right? Of first do no harm. That's what we have to be in IT. We have to say first and foremost, our we have a goal of not making things worse. We don't want things to become worse, and we don't do things that we know will make things worse. We just don't. If they tell us to, we object appropriately, and if they still tell us to, we quit. If we know it's going to be harmful, that's just like a hill we die on. And a methodology allows that to happen. The other thing is making it simple so that everybody understands. And in when I researched my book, this was way back in 2017 actually that I started doing the research for the book, and I found that there was a lot of really complicated, impressive sounding agile processes and things like that. Well, you know what? Nobody's really impressed with that. And the smarter you make yourself sound, the more isolated you become. So what suggested and still suggest to this day, I've not changed my mind in 7 years of looking at this, and that is that your methodology should basically have four phases or milestones to it. The first is that you understand. The second is that you have a plan. Third is that you safely change. And fourth is that you pledge to maintain. And that's really what it comes down to. It's a cyclical process. Dive into at another time, I think. But honestly, that's not changed for me. But the key here is making sure that everyone understands it. And that can reduce traumas because if everyone understands where you're at in a process, they're not frustrated by it. They have already agreed that that is the process we follow. And if you are saying, this is where I'm at in the process, don't push me. I can't be pushed because we have a process. We agreed to this. That's the way that works. And so if it's simpler for them to understand and it's not super complicated, like, oh my gosh, you're in the uh, gathering requirements phase or whatever. Yeah, I was like, what does that mean? You know, what? I'm a salesperson. I don't speak that language. Those kind of things. So we make it simple as we can. The other thing is to have a consistent change pattern where, I recommend a pretty straightforward sub process to this, where it's like develop, test, do a pilot, and then do it in production. And if you do that consistently, and that's the agreement that the organization has, that seriously reduces traumas because you're not suddenly trying to bypass that process. You always have that. Now you might iterate faster, but you're always following the process. And the thing I tell people all the time is that practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And so if it is your company's practice to do out of band changes and just force them into production with no testing or with minimal testing, and there's no development process there, it's just a matter of just, let's just see if it works. That becomes what's permanent. That becomes your process. So if you practice that, that's what it becomes. So it's important to know that. What I say all the time is if you bypass your methodology because there isn't time, time will be made for you, but it will not be on your terms. Say that again. If you bypass your methodology because there isn't time to do it, time will be made for you, but it will not be on your terms. In other words, get your resume ready. All right. Let's dive into some things that I think are advice for anybody who's working in IT services to be able to help mitigate some of these things. Now, I want to say before I go on here, this is actually pretty important. And that is that you really need to know that dealing with trauma a lot of times will take therapy. And that is something that I actually engaged in. Um, just, just not an endorsement or anything like that, but I'll just say that I hired um, BetterHelp to find a therapist to work with, and that was the thing that helped me do to deal with these traumas that built up, so that I wasn't taking out my anger on other people. I wasn't snapping for no reason. I wasn't drawing away from stressful situations inappropriately. I dealt with the traumas that way. But there are some things we can do to kind of try and mitigate or prevent more traumas, and that's what I want to focus on next. So first of all is a concept of taking control of your calendar. But I guess what I really mean with that is not necessarily your calendar. What I really mean is your time. And your time is the most valuable asset that you have, believe it or not. It's it's a finite resource. Problem is you don't know how much of it you have, but you know how much of it you lost. You know what's behind you. You don't know what's in front of you, but you know it's behind you. So it is a resource that you need to be more protective of than I think a lot of people in IT are. They're just going through their day and they're letting Outlook determine their schedule. Well, there's a concept that was put forward by an entrepreneur named Tim Ferriss. And what he put forward was, well, what would happen if you put out an email autoresponder on Outlook that said, "Thank you for your message. I check my messages from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. every day. If your message is between those times, I will get back to you at my earliest convenience. If you need help right away, call our help desk at blah, blah, blah." That was the notion of doing that and literally making it so that you're only checking Outlook during those times. You're only checking your email during those times. You're not making exceptions to that. What's the worst that could happen if that happened? You know, what what would be the result of that? And I know right now there are people out there that are saying to themselves, "Yeah, right, DJ. That will never fly. That will never be something that I can do." Well, I would posit to you that this is something that I have been challenging people with and have seen successes with. In fact, what I've seen is in organizations that do that, they become aware of how much single threaded they're making people by having this in place where you have always up on your monitor. It's always there. It's not really being checked often enough, or it never feels like it's done. And so the eye is always drawn to it because it's always you're looking for that next message, and it's a constant trauma trigger. Every time an email comes in, your heart skips a beat. That sort of thing happens in those kind of circumstances. Well, if you have it to where you have an agreement with management, with whoever, that that is going to be the case. And then, say, for example, you're working in IT services and you have a bunch of people that are in your department, and you set up when people are checking their email, and you have scattered, time frames of doing that. So you're covering everything you need to be covered, but you're actually protecting your time in that regards, but also you're protecting your attention. And there's ways to do this. I mean, I have alarms on my watch, for example, that tell me, "Hey, get up, move around. Hey, check email." It's reminders like that. It becomes habit. But honestly, it's like I don't necessarily need to be responding to emails right away. There's a thread going on Facebook, or sorry, in LinkedIn right now, actually, as I'm recording this, that is all about a CEO that actually has a footer message that says, "I've sent you an email when it's convenient for me. Please respond when it's convenient for you." Little things like that matter too. But the concept is that you're not treating everything as urgent. You're only treating things that are urgent as urgent. There is a fantastic book out there called Deep Work by Cal Newport that I highly recommend that everybody in information technology read. And largely because it really is about minimizing distractions by focusing intently. Or maybe I said that backwards. Maybe it's, yeah, you focus intently by minimizing distractions. I'll get it right. But the concept here is that you are not allowing things to distract you on purpose, not by accident. That you are setting up routines that are non-negotiable. In other words, you're saying, "No, I can't go to that meeting because this is part of my routine and this is my regular day. I have time set aside for meetings from X to X," and making that authority. Um, the other thing is avoid appearing busy. This is a big one. This is something that we really struggle with in information technology because a lot of times we will make ourselves look busy just to think we're adding value that way, or we're concerned about those brass handcuffs, and so we appear busy. But that's like the last thing in the world you want to do. The other thing is recognizing the limits of your willpower is a daily depleting thing, and so I say all the time, you won't rise to the occasion. You'll only rise to your level of preparedness. And so if you don't have systems in place that help you get past your willpower, then you're going to find yourself struggling day after day, getting more and more behind every single day because the reality is your willpower just doesn't have those kind of um, it doesn't have that power behind it. So you have limits to that, and you have to recognize that and set up things about that. And other things to keep score. I am actually just to draw back the curtain a little bit here. I'm actually working on a IT focused planner, like a physical written planner that allows things like this for you to be able to keep score, to be able to write down follow ups, be able to do things like have KPIs that you're defining for yourself. Some people call it the most important number system, but the idea is that you're always um, tracking what's working, what's not. And I mentioned this, but getting management buy-in for blocking off time for these kind of things is really important, especially for things like documentation, um, continued learning and coaching, uh, being mentored and mentoring others. If you don't have time set aside in your week that these things are agreed that they're going to happen with management, then they'll find other things for you to do with your time. What I always tell people is that management is in the the job or the role of managing resources. And believe it or not, you are a resource. And so um, if they see that you're idle, they'll find something for you to do, kind of thing. But if you have agreements ahead of time that say, yeah, we're going to update our documentation of everything we did this week, and we do this every Friday at 3 p.m. If that's a set up, a blocked out time for that, there's no negotiating that. There's no meetings that happen during that time. This is documentation time. If you can do that, and this is something that is kind of talked about a little bit in the goal is getting that as a constraint and elevating that of saying, hey, if we have things like if documentation is constantly a problem in our environment, we set aside time to make that a priority, and we set aside time to make it a priority, not hope it gets done. We don't rely on our willpower. We don't rely on anything. We say this is part of our system. Same thing with growing as a person. Same thing with growing as a professional. Being coached, it's really key. And so when when it comes to that, it really is crucially important. One thing I want to talk about here that I talk about all the time with my coaching clients, especially, but this is something that one of the people that coached me turned me on to, and that is that agreements are always better than expectations. So the problem with this is expectations are subject to change in emotions. Now, agreements are things that can be negotiated and referenced down to. You can actually have things that are like really literally written down is what I like to see with agreements, so that both sides know exactly what's there, and you're not dealing with expectations on either side. Like, I expect you to be at your office from blah 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 blah. I expect that you'd be there. I expect you to be available. Did we agree to that? Was that written down somewhere? This is the kind of thing that helps keep you from those traumas. If you're always responding to expectations, you never really truly know what those are. Those are the emotion of another person, and that's hard to determine. And so you want to always be in a place where you um, are not in that kind of realm. The other thing is to don't assume that management knows the best way. This is another thing that really happens with this is that I always like to say that if I'm the smartest person in the room, I might be in the wrong room. Management hired you because you're smart, so be smart. Now, when it comes to making these agreements out of expectations, is there's a concept called find the win. And this is something that I kind of learned in negotiating that is really key, but I'm finding that it's really important for setting up agreements is that you find the win for them, not just for you. So, like, say, for example, what I was talking about with the setting aside documentation. You bring up that we have a constant issue with our changes not being documented. People don't know how to do it. When it comes up, 3 years from now, oh, hey, what did we do when we did that one system? This is a constant challenge, and they acknowledge that. And you say, what do you think that's costing us when that happens? What is the financial impact to the lost time that happens when that occurs? And they say something about that. And so would you like to make it so that that does not happen again? And they'd say yes. And then you say, okay, here's what we need to do. We need to set aside time every week to make sure things are properly documented. And we need to have that non negotiable where that's all we do during that time. And we're not allowed to do anything else, that you hold us to that. And we hold ourselves to that as well. That we agree that Friday from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., we make sure our documentation is up to date. And then we write that down. That becomes an agreement that's based on a win for them. May not be a win for you. I know a lot of people don't like documentation as the example, but the thing is, you've now found a way to move things forward that is amicable for everybody. And I know I'm talking in things like that. I'm usually talking to more of those that are in kind of mid-level leadership and that sort of thing, team leadership, that sort of thing, that are having to deal with these kind of things. But it's important for you to know that's finding that win is the important part of the process there. And the other thing is to speak up. You know, don't just expect that you're going to be heard. They're not psychic. And honestly, when you're faced with a conflict of agreements, in other words, when you have somebody that is now expecting something that's different than what you agreed to, this is actually really key. Instead of just caving in and just doing it, because again, you're you're going to become not perfect. It's practice, right? Um, when you're faced with a conflict like that, you always want to ask management, okay, do we need to change our agreement? And they'll usually back off at that point. They'll usually say, oh, yeah, you know what? Actually, let's keep to that agreement. I don't want to break that agreement. You know, maybe it's not that important. These are the kind of things that happen, but you have to be able to defend the agreement and not allow emotions to get past that. Now, if somebody's dying, obviously, it changes things a little bit, right? You have the things that are it's like if they do want to violate that agreement, great, but make it on them to do that. Don't make it on you to violate the agreement. There's a couple things here I'm going to go through really quick here as far as like some of the strategies here. One is to play it forward. You look at each of the kind of steps that happen in your life in your life. I guess you could say that. I always think of it like a uh, playing back a. I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but like rewinding a tape and then playing it again, then rewinding a tape and playing it again. It's sort of like that where you start to learn what's coming up and you learn patterns and you see, okay, what happened during this? What kind of things led up to that? And what could I do differently? And you learn to spot these kind of things. And so you kind of look at what has happened. We can do that in incidents. You can do that in your work life. You can do this in your home life. But the more you do to play things forward like that, of saying, okay, I've learned in the past that this pattern looks like this. And so in my current life right now, if I were to kind of imagine myself going forward from this point, what would that look like if I continue this pattern? And what can I change to do differently? Asking yourself questions like, well, what would happen if this change goes out to everyone untested? What would the future results of that be? What would the impact of an outage really be? I ask this question all the time in designing systems for disaster recovery and things like that. What would the impact actually be if you had this outage? Do you have financial impacts? Do you have emotional impacts? What would the actual result be? What's the actual impact? And then when you see others not thinking ahead, speak up, bring it up. It's important. They need to know. And speak up appropriately, obviously, but but don't just let that still occur. Another concept here is that you want to be proactive because that actually leads to productivity. There's a notion here that sometimes you can only have productivity if you're reactive. But reactive people are replaceable. Proactive people are promoted. I'll say that again. Reactive people are replaceable. Proactive people are promoted. So if you have automations, that's great, but they only really work once they've been validated manually. What we've seen in AI in the last 2 years specifically is like, okay, great. Does that follow a process that's actually vetted? Has there been proactive thought about this put in, or is it just kind of like, yeah, we'll just have that figured out? I don't think so. Documentation is another one of those where I see this as a kindness for the crisis to come because it will. I'll tell people all the time, it's like the battle's coming. Whether you're ready for it or not, whether you like it or not, whether you want to participate in it or not, doesn't matter. That battle is coming, and if you're not ready for it, you're going to be stressed by it. If you're not ready for it, you're going to be overwhelmed by it. And documentation is in information technology. That's one of the ways to prevent that trauma from occurring, or at least to make it easier to deal with when it does. Getting the right tools in place, whether that be testing, whether that be whatever that looks like for your particular realm of IT. That's like looking at, are we going to have some hardware failures? I originally gave this presentation for Login VSI and was telling a story of being at a place where they had brand new hardware all put in place. And what we didn't know is that there's a bunch of memory modules that were about to fail when they got accessed, and so we happened to stress test the systems ahead of time, and it's a good thing we did with actual workloads, not just with like them being powered on and whatever, but actual putting like stress workloads to them, and we found that yeah, there was like 3 servers out of 40 or something like that had failures when we did that. So if that hadn't been done proactively, then that would have been discovered in production, which would have been a lot more drama, especially with that number of servers going out all at the same time. It would have been quite a crisis. So you sometimes don't see that if you're not testing well enough, and so a lot of times automation helps with that. By the way, but things like that really what it boils down to it though is that productivity, sorry, proactivity begins with a human. You are that human. AI is great and all, but it's just not to that point of being able to predict what's going to happen. It's not really there. That's still a human. It's like an intuition kind of a thing, and so it really making that happen is really a human thing. Remember, reactive people are replaceable. Proactive people are promoted. So a couple of things here, and then we'll wrap up. Communicate your challenges. Management isn't psychic about this, but yeah, they don't understand how you do what you do, but that's why you were hired. So really, it becomes about communication and communicating challenges in completing tasks, for example, especially because of like unplanned work that comes up. That's not a weakness on your part. It really is a matter of just making it so that you are able to communicate to management, hey, this is going to cause this impact. We're not going to be able to complete this task because of this. If they know in advance, or they know before it becomes a crisis, then they can react to it. Like I said, management is there to manage resources, and people are essentially a resource in that regards. Time is a resource, and so if they know about it, they can respond to it, and that can look like a different kind of ways and different kind of things. In the book, The Phoenix Project, this is the embodied in a character called Brent, who is really super competent, but really bad at communication and really bad at being misdirected in his work all the time and responding to the loudest voice. And it causes problems of constraints, but also causes outages and things like that that are occurring that get fixed without anybody knowing how to do that or how to improve. So don't be Brent. Read the Phoenix Project. I'm reading that right now. Actually, I'm rereading that again or re-listening to it again. It's a good resource, and I'm actually working on a novel myself that is very similar in a lot of ways, and so I'm looking forward to that. More on that to come. But the other thing is to resist taking on what you know you cannot handle because you think it's somehow going to be like done or remembered. Well, what will be remembered in that case is your failures, not your successes. So if you can't handle it, don't take it on. That's just if you're made to, or I shouldn't say made to, if you are required to for your job, that's different. But make sure you're communicating it up front. It's like, okay, this is not my primary. I'm gonna have to learn this along the way. We have to give some space for that. If you don't do that, if you don't communicate that, well, what's going to be remembered about that is your failures. Reactive people get replaced. This is something that I bring up probably not frequently enough, but that is that community matters. Isolation is something that increases trauma, um, and it actually makes the impacts of traumas worse if you are facing it alone. And I don't mean just at work. I mean having a community of people that have similar challenges to you and have those kind of things, and so you're able to feel it out with others that are going through those similar challenges. Um, you're able to be have empathy with them, not sympathy. Sympathy is, oh, you poor thing. Empathy is, oh, that's really hard. What was that like? You see the difference there? One is actually wanting to know about the other's challenges fully. The other is just being feeling sorry for them, taking pity, making them a victim. So empathy wins out over sympathy. Listen for what's worked for others and adapt that to your situation. In other words, learn from the challenges others have faced. This is something that for me, I'm big into the proverbs in the Bible. It's a big thing for me, and there's a lot of wisdom that is kind of passed down from person to person, and learning from others' challenges, learning from others' mistakes, and that's a huge thing for me. And so I encourage that very much to learn from what has worked from others and things that maybe didn't work. But others, be a mentor others, and feel free to be mentored yourself. When it comes to that, if you've been working in information technology for a week, you're already ahead of someone who has been there a day. Everybody can be a mentor at some level. Everybody can share their experiences at some level. Just because you don't feel adequate, you don't feel like you've been there since, NT4 or whatever, it doesn't mean you can't mentor people. It doesn't mean you're not valuable in that regards. And then be aware if you are doing things like self-medicating, even if you're doing it socially, it's something to very much be aware of. That is, it's important to. And when I say that, I mean things like alcohol, drugs. There's even some aspects of this to where you are um, allowing certain types of conversation to kind of be a escape. And some of this is probably okay, like sports and things like that. But there's a lot of escapism in conversation that becomes a kind of self medication for trauma that doesn't work to actually fix the trauma. In fact, it makes it worse in a lot of these cases, especially with like politics and things like that. You can actually be giving yourself that kind of initial endorphin hit by, identifying in some way, shape, or fashion and having somebody else agree with you or disagree with you or whatever. But ultimately, it doesn't fix the problem underlying it. And that's what, so if you're self medicating, even socially, this is something that's really important to recognize that it's important to rein that in and be part of a community instead of just, you know, participating, I guess you could say, or showing up, but be part of it. Like, be active. All right, I want to go into a section that I call resource of the week before we wrap up here. And this is just something I'll be doing every week where I'll pick some sort of resource for you and to help you kind of in your day-to-day work, your life, whatever that looks like. It may not always be IT related, but it's something for you. So today I wanted to bring up something called pre-search. Pre-search is a way to do searching online that keeps you from being shown up as, as a number or a metric. What's happening here is that you go to presearch.com and you can either sign up for an account or just use it. It doesn't really matter. But you can actually um, participate in that you're searching. Let me say that a different way. You can actually do your search, and what's happening there is a node out there on the internet somewhere is doing that search on your behalf. And so what Google sees is that node. Google does not see you. And so that transaction is hidden back and forth. And so you are protected from that search. And so this is really handy for me because incognito mode, for example, doesn't necessarily keep you from that search history. It doesn't keep you from that. So if you're like, for example, the other day that I was looking for a product, um, I did a search on pre-search and looked for a few things, and then later that day, my wife and I were talking about something, and she searched on Google for it. Next thing you know, I'm getting ads in Facebook for it. That's kind of confusing, right? No, it's because that IP address is now associated with that search, and those systems are smart enough to recognize that. And so I'm getting ads for something my wife searched for. That's not crazy. Yeah. So pre-search helps prevent that because that search that happened has somebody else's IP out there, and so I actually run several pre-search nodes. Actually, that's something that I earn tokens when people search with that, and so there'll be a code in the description where you can actually sign up for that and be part of that system if you want to. You also get little rewards for doing searches in this way. It's an ecosystem that's supported with its own cryptocurrency. It's kind of cool to learn about. But the main thing about the resource is to know that there's a way to do searching that hides your information from Google. That's your resource of the week. All right, let's land this plane. Let's look at a way forward here out of the IT traumas. Here at Thrive IT, we have four pillars that we talk about. And one is mastery. That's basically just to be known for something awesome. Uh, to have a technology that you are really good at or something you're really good at. Doesn't even have to be technology. I've actually been challenging people lately that leadership is a mastery thing to really think about in technology, not just in terms of how the technology works, but in terms of leading people. I think that there is a gap in that part of the field. And actually, I'll go ahead and say it. I'm willing to announce this now that next year I will be launching a coaching program that is very specific to helping tech people that have been put into leadership positions to be able to achieve more and more greater things without having to have the fear of trying to figure it out on their own. So that will be a 6-month coaching program that I'm putting forward. If you want to learn more about that, let me know. Contact me. There'll be a link in the description and how to connect with me if you don't know how to already. Feel free to reach out to me about that. We can talk more about that, what that's going to look like, and when that launches. There's some for some of my listeners, for some of my folks. There's actually a preview coming up soon. Just to let you know. So that's something you're very interested in, being coached by me. Let me know. But that's getting the right tools, getting the right people in your lives. Methodology, obviously, is the other thing. The other M is methodology. Lead by following a process. It's really you setting the tone of saying this is this is how we do this. This is our method. This is what we've adopted. And whether it's my methodology or someone else's methodology, I don't really care. As long as you have something that you have as a standard for your process. The other thing is the other M is mindset. Protect what matters. Hint here, your time matters. Protect that. So make sure you're focused on protecting the things in your mindset and making sure that's visible to others. Now, another thing is to pass on what you've learned. This is mentoring. I always like to say that my mission in life is to leave the world better than I found it. And so that can take on a lot of different things, a lot of different ways, but that's always my mission. So I encourage you to pass on what you've learned. The majority of people that are listening to me are those that are actually more experienced in their careers, that have, more than 3 years of experience. And so this is why I'm pushing for this so hard, is that it's really important not only to be mentored, but to be a mentor for others. What I find is that that actually helps reduce the trauma load, is when I can feel like it meant something, when I can pass something on to others and they can grow from my pain. That makes that pain more worth it in my mind and in my heart. So leave the world better than you found it. Awesome stuff, gang. Well, I tell you what, you can always connect with us. If you're not part of our YouTube community, feel free to do that as well. We have some additional resources there. You can go to thrive-it.com/subme. Connect with me on LinkedIn. It's easy. LinkedIn.com/in/DJ Eshelman. It's easy. But I've mentioned a lot of things today that if you want to schedule a call with me, that is something that you can do. If you want to get a half hour of my calendar, that's something I make available for my subscribers and my listeners. You go to thrive-it.com/meet DJ430. And as long as it's not abused, which it hasn't been so far, so I'm having full faith that it'll be fine. That's a way to get on my calendar, and we can talk more about these challenges. We can talk more about coaching, talk more about whatever it is. But I have a resource for you, and that is that you have an opportunity right now to name your own price for my book, Just Do This, which is where we talk about the methodology and talk about how to make sure you're covering all your bases in information technology. It's a guide to your IT career. And so I have more copies of this than I need. And so what I'm doing right now is a notion of just name your own price. Just tell me what works. As long as we're covering the cost of printing and shipping, and that's not an expense to me, I'm not worried about making a profit on it. All I'm asking in return is that you answer one key question to help us better understand what the challenges that you're facing are. And so you can do that. I'll have a link in the description. It's a little bit of a long link right now. I need to shorten it out for people, but for right now, it'll be in the description. And yeah, that's that. So as it turns out, that is actually also our seasonal sponsor for this season of the podcast is my book, Just Do This. What I always say is the problem isn't your tech knowledge. The problem is your methods. And so that is why I wrote this book and why I'm making this available for you at whatever price you think is fair. Just go to that link in the description and find that. And there's some other bonus resources that are coming available too. There's a whole revamped system that I'm considering even doing here on the podcast to further enhance that. But it'll always work better if you have the book. So get it. Don't worry about don't worry about me. I'm fine. Don't worry about you know whatever it is. Just I want this to be in your hands no matter what it takes. And so you cover my costs and we are good. But if you want to give me more, you can do that too. It's a way you can do all that. And so I encourage that. Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, everybody, it's been great to be with you here today on the How to Thrive in IT podcast. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Yeah, I need a clever sign off line on that, but I don't have one. So there it is. Have a great day, everybody. All right. Well, thank you everyone once again for being with me here live. This is a fun little experiment that we'll probably keep going with. It's great that I can actually multicast this to multiple places while I'm recording an episode. That was actually kind of fun. Um, that one was probably more organized and longer than a lot of these episodes will be, but it's a message that I really felt like getting out there. And so, thanks for being on this journey with me here. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I will get to them. I am not positive I am actually that I have visibility on LinkedIn. I might have to go back and see that. So if you're watching this with me here live on LinkedIn, you can just put a comment in and see if I see it here. I'm just mostly curious about that. Um, but there's a little experiment that I wanted to run here. Let me get the slideshow I had going ended here. And um, so in the future, as we grow this, I'm going to want to have it to where I have a vote for what kind of style of music to to go with a theme for that day, and then I'm going to have this software called Suno AI. Let me get this on the screen here and see if I can actually do this. We're going to try a little experiment here with nothing like a um, experimenting live, but in this particular case, because I know this is a small audience with me here live and I can edit it out after the fact, then we're going to do it here. So, Suno. All right. So, if you're not familiar with this, Suno AI or Suno.com, I guess now, allows you to create a full song and can actually put you put in a word description and a style and it'll come up with something. So let me give you an example. So back in the day, I had this run through a theme. Oh, I can't remember which one it was. I think it was this one. And so let's play this a little bit for you. Because hopefully that's coming through. I didn't even think about that. Like, we're experimenting a lot of different pieces of this, but that is what this can do, which is kind of amazing. That was back like 3 versions ago. This has actually been updated since then to even be better. Um, and so I think I had to do this again. So I gave it some different prompts and trying to see what it can come up with. And so version 3.5 did this.
Right now, we're alone in the dark. Echoes of data and bikes till they spark. Found a new way to make your mark. No more drifting a million miles apart.
Yeah, so that I don't know how to fast forward to different parts of the song, but yeah, it's as somebody who's obviously written music in his life and everything like that, this has been just kind of entertaining. Scary in some ways, but entertaining in others. And so the idea here is that we will at every episode or whatever, we will have a theme that we have, and so we'll say this one is let's see. I'm trying to think of it. If anybody has a style of music they want to hear in this, they can put in the chat here live with me. But um, I will say we will say a song about traumas faced by people working in information technology. They are woken up at 3 a.m. to go fight fires in a server room. And let's do this in country style. I actually don't like country music very much, but let's see what it comes up with. I think I might actually need to word that here. Let's do it this way. A country style song about traumas faced by people working in information technology, woken up at 3 a.m. to go fight fires in a server room. And then I always want to include the chorus. Just survive IT. You've got to thrive. Oh no, I'm running out of space. Oh no. Might have to play with that a bit. Well, let's see what this comes up with first. This is our first run with this. If we do this, say include. Let's see what this comes up with. I'm actually kind of curious now. Anyway, the idea here is that once we've got a theme we like, we'll actually make that the theme music of the episode when it goes into podcast form. We'll see. Like I said, it's highly experimental, but we'll see what it looks like. All right, so let's see what it came up with.
Another day, another screen. The pixels paint the scene. Coffee's gone cold, and I'm lost in the machine. Numbers and codes, they keep pulling me back. The weight of the deadlines like a train on the tracks. Emails pile up, taking their toll. Hours feel endless, and it's eating at my soul. Boss man's barking, says we're running out of time. Burnout Burnouts at the door, knocking steady with the chime. Don't just survive IT, you've got to thrive IT. Find a way to breathe, let your heart be free. In the midst of the noise, chase your own melody.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much.
Colleagues on the edge, tied up in their chairs, eyes strained tight under fluorescent glares. The clock's stuck fast, it's a race we can't win, but I've got to believe there's a way out of this spin. Weekends come and go, but rest don't feel right. Waking up at 3 a.m., the cold floods my sight. Family's in the wings, but I can't find the time. Telling myself one day, but every day is a climb. Don't just survive IT, you've got to thrive IT. Find a way to breathe, let your heart be free. In the midst of the noise, chase your own melody. Colleagues on the edge, tied up in their chairs, eyes strained tight under fluorescent glares. The clock's stuck fast, it's a race we can't win, but I've got to believe there's a way out of this spin. Don't just survive IT, you've got to thrive IT. Find a way to breathe, let your heart be free. In the midst of the noise, chase your own melody. Don't just survive IT.
Oh my gosh. Oh, we moved on to the second one. I think it's the same lyrics.
Another day, another screen, the pixels paint the scene. Coffee's gone cold, and I'm lost in the machine. Numbers and codes, they keep pulling me back. The weight of the deadlines, like a train on the tracks. Emails pile up, taking their toll. Hours feel endless, and it's eating at my soul. Boss man's barking, says we're running out of time. Burnouts at the door, knocking steady with the chime. Don't just survive IT, you've got to thrive IT. Find a way to breathe, let your heart be free. In the midst of the noise, chase your own melody. Colleagues on the edge, tied up in their chairs, eyes strained tight under fluorescent glares. The clock's stuck fast, it's a race we can't win, but I've got to believe there's a way out of this spin. Weekends come and go, but rest don't feel right. Waking up at 3 a.m., the cold floods my sight. Family's in the wings, but I can't find the time. Telling myself one day, but every day is a climb. Don't just survive IT, you've got to thrive IT. Find a way to breathe, let your heart be free. In the midst of the noise, chase your own melody. Colleagues on the edge, tied up in their chairs, eyes strained tight under fluorescent glares. The clock's stuck fast, it's a race we can't win, but I've got to believe There's a way out of this spin. Weekends come and go, but rest don't feel right. Waking up at 3 a.m., the code floods my sight. Family's in the wings, but I can't find the time. Telling myself one day, but every day is a climb. Don't just survive IT, you've got to thrive IT. Find a way to breathe, let your heart be free. In the midst of the noise, chase your own melody. You got a way to breathe, let your heart be free. In the midst of the noise, chase your own melody.
I don't even. I needed that. I needed that today. Oh my gosh. So I tell you what I'm gonna do is those of you that are watching this, vote on which one of those you like more. And when the podcast goes live, that will be the that'll be the theme song for that episode. I love it. I love this idea so much. Hope everybody else does too. But in nonetheless, I do hope you have a great day and that you've enjoyed this process. Obviously, there's a lot of editing that has to happen with all this, and so I appreciate your patience with me going on and on, and the you're getting a little, obviously a lot extra. So plan is to continue doing this every week. We'll find a time that works for everybody, but I think this one is probably going to be the most consistent for me, and so I think we'll probably just run with that and just hope everybody can attend. Look for some other things happening too. There's some things reemerging with this now that we're kind of getting back into the swing of things with a new direction. But I just in closing today, I do want to encourage you that if you would like to reach out to me, feel free to do so. And we thank our quote unquote sponsors, which is both AeroPress as a resource for great tasting coffee. Yeah. And then also for pre-search to be able to search privately. And then, of course, my book. Go get it. All right, guys. Have a great day. And I will see you next week, if not sooner. You never know. Bye, everybody.